Hello, welcome to our Creative Writing Friday lunchtime, the first one for this semester. And today I'm going to be talking to Brigid Mullane. Before I introduce Bridget, I'd like to acknowledge that I am on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, land that was never ceded. I extend my respect to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal people present, as well as to the people of the lands that you are joining us from. So, Bridget, hello, welcome.
Hi.
We're very pleased to have you with us. So just a little bit about Bridget before we begin. So Brigid Mullane is commissioning editor at Ultimo Press. She previously worked at Hachette, where she was managing editor. Before that, she was editor of literary journal Kill Your Darlings, communications manager at Writers Victoria, and she has also worked in a variety of roles at Melbourne Writers Festival, National Young Writers Festival, Emerging Writers Festival, the Sun Bookshop and the Brunswick Street bookstore. So lots of experience there for us to mine. I think that some of the students that are joining us are from the Master of Publishing, and I can see several names that I know from the Master of Creative Writing and also our doctoral students. So welcome. Whatever your interest is in being here, I'm sure that we will get much of value. So Bridget, we have the little potted biography, but I wondered if we might sort of expand on your biography and if you could tell us about your journey through publishing, how you found your way into this world, what led you to it, maybe some detail of the kinds of decisions that you've made when you've changed roles and so on. It will all be of interest to us.
Thanks, Belinda. Hi, everyone. So it's interesting when you sort of lay it all out like that. It almost feels like there was linear decision making going from bookstores to festivals to publishing to where I am now. But really at the time, it was just trying to get as close as I could to working with words in whatever way that was possible. So I also did an undergraduate and a master's degree in editing and then in publishing, and worked in bookstores as a way to be around books and you know, get an idea of that. Found it very hard to get an in-house job in Melbourne, so I just kept trying whatever I could. Festivals was a great way to meet authors, and that led me to Kill Your Darlings, which was kind of my most formative experience of all the things that I worked out I loved, which was working with authors, commissioning work, editing, proofreading, and also the production of a book when you're working on a print anthology. I'm sure some of you in the room have been part of your university's anthologies. You sort of get this snapshot of what happens with a book, where you start with the work, edit it, polish it, typeset it, produce it, and then you have a finished thing at the end. And that's what I really enjoyed. I liked the project management, I liked the author care, and I liked getting really stuck in to ideas that people were working on. But still, the in-house jobs were hard to get. So I freelanced for a really long time as an editor, and that led to a maternity leave position at Hachette, which then became the managing editor role, which then became my new role at Ultimo, which is a commissioning editor role. So that is finding the authors or having the authors approach me and working with them to actually publish the books. Oh, sorry, Belinda, you're just muted.
Sorry. Could you believe it at this stage? Yeah, whenever we look back on the narrative of our careers, it seems as though there was some kind of plan, and we followed those steps logically. But from my own work in publishing and from speaking to people like you, the common things seem to be being present, so being involved in whatever way is available, and making connections, and when you get the chance, showing people what you can do, and finding those little opportunities. I also started working in publishing covering a maternity leave position. Yes, long may the editors reproduce so we get a chance to.
Yes.
Okay, so it sounds as though from the kinds of work that you're already talking about that you do, that publishing is a pretty varied business. So what would a typical day hold? What kind of different things?
Well, my role's interesting, I guess, in that I'm a commissioning editor, but I also function at Ultimo as a managing editor. So Ultimo is a new independent press. We've just had our 2nd birthday. So the team is quite small. We're 7 at the moment. So for me, there's a couple of parts to my job. One is the publishing of books of my own, and then the other side is the project management of other publishers' books. So that's kind of a project editing role. So in any day, I might be helping the other publishers with a cover brief for one of their books. I might be helping talk one of their authors through the copy edit process, or getting a text design for one of their books, or booking in freelance proofreaders and copy editors and managing the schedules and the budgets and all of the things that go along with that. And as a commissioner, I'll be working with my authors in a more deep way in a structural or developmental edit. So getting really stuck into how the book is shaped and what their message is, helping them refine their voice, talking to them about cover concepts. So there's sort of this big picture and micro parts to both of those jobs. And I'm both doing the publishing work for my own authors and then doing the project management work for some other people. So there's a real wide range of things going on at any particular time.
Is it how you imagined it would be?
No, see, I think editorial, for anyone who's interested in editing here, I had a very different vision of what in-house editorial work would be. I thought it would be a lot more hands-on copy editing and proofreading and those sorts of things on a day-to-day, but in-house in most of the big publishers, the editorial role is often a really project management focused role. So you're not doing lots of deep editorial work. You are liaising with a freelancer to help them do that work and then checking that work. So it was totally different to what I had expected. And I think it's kind of different to what everyone thinks that an editing job would be like once you got into a publishing house. I think maybe I was the only person who was naive enough to think that you would sit there all day, like reading and editing. And it really was quite especially for the multinationals where I was at Hachette, it's a very, very fast paced, like project, deadline driven, go, go, go. So that idea of sitting and like stewing in the work wasn't really there, which I think is why a lot of really good editors stay freelance, because that seems to be the place where they can really manage their own time and engage with the work. But it was also part of the reason that I went from Hachette to Ultimo, because Ultimo is a smaller publisher, and part of the idea behind Ultimo is that we keep a bit more of that work in-house or with the editors, with the publishers, because the reason we all got into it was really to engage with authors and their work. So the idea of, you know, commissioning a book and then just handing it over to someone is not satisfying for me, which is why I wanted to kind of make the move.
That's interesting, the difference between an incredibly large company like Hachette and a startup like Ultimo. So can you tell us more about Ultimo? It's always this sort of exhilarating thing to witness a new publishing imprint startup, and also slightly nerve-wracking even from the sidelines. So what's the idea behind Ultimo? What is it that you're hoping to make?
Yeah, so it's a new independent in Sydney. So there's a great independent in Sydney already, Giramondo, but that's kind of the main independent press up in Sydney, and all of the rest of independent publishing is really focused around Melbourne. So there was, I think, an idea to kind of bring another independent up to New South Wales. And the idea is really to take some of the lessons from the multinationals. All of us have come from like these big publishing houses with lots of marketing budgets, but like quite a big list. Take lessons from that and try to champion smaller works, more challenging form, authors that might not get a run in another traditional publishing house. So we see ourselves sort of sitting in the middle of the market, not wholly indie in the sense of not having a commercial responsibility. We still need to try and make money, as everybody does, but not being so commercial that we don't value some of the cultural contributions of a really good book. You know, there are things that literature and writing and art bring that are more valuable than money sometimes. And those things should be valued when you're discussing what kinds of books to take to print. Not only will it make money, but what else does it do as well, while trying not to lose money. That's the that's the secret.
I'm not expecting you to give away any secrets here, but I'm just imagining your acquisitions meetings must be quite interesting, because you're sort of shaping a vision with every book at the beginning.
Yeah, and we have at Ultimo we have everyone in our acquisition meeting. So there is only 7, so you know it's not so many voices that you can't hear everyone, but just that idea that if you have a more flat structure, you don't have a massive hierarchy between who gets to say what good books are, you have the chance to potentially be a bit more representative of what readers actually look like, not what you think readers want. But if you get to hear from everybody, there's potentially things that will be of interest to maybe some of the younger team members or the older team members, or from different parts of the country, that you just wouldn't know if you have a really stiff hierarchy of, well, we're not going to listen to the coordinator, because what would the coordinator know? But if the coordinator reads widely and works in publishing, then the potential for them to have a valuable opinion is, and one that might be different from your own, is kind of, it seems silly to not engage with that. Yeah, is that what I forget the question?
Yeah, no,
something like that. Yeah, so they are, as you can tell, probably long, interesting conversations about what might work and how, and you know what makes an Ultimo book. That we talk about that a lot in terms of, we like to say there's nothing that's not Ultimo, but there is kind of an Ultimo way to do things. So then it becomes about, we're still in that defining stage, I think, of our publishing.
You sort of cut off my next question, which was I thought, oh, what does make an Ultimo book then?
Oh, yeah.
But nothing, there isn't an Ultimo book.
No, but I think, yeah, there's an Ultimo way to do things. So I think we're interested in all sorts of genres, but how to push categories forward a little bit, or push, maybe it's not even push, because I think potentially the Australian publishing industry has underestimated Australian readers and what they're willing to engage with, or what they want to read. So I published my first book this month, which is Sophie Cunningham's This Devastating Fever, which is this amazing kind of melding of fact and fiction and footnotes, and there's Leonard Woolf and there's all this stuff going on. And I was a little apprehensive, I think, that maybe people wouldn't get it. And I just loved it. I thought it was so fun and so funny. But when everyone was reading it, even one of my favorite reviews, I think, was from like Rush magazine, which is a kind of cool young women's magazine. I don't know if it's still cool. It was cool in my day. And the reviewer had sort of said, like, I have no idea what just happened to me, but I loved it. And I think that idea that like people have not been given the opportunity necessarily, unless they're really seeking it out, to be challenged. And I think readers are ready and waiting, and a lot smarter than publishing people think, probably.
Yeah, this is what we want to hear. Absolutely. So I'm just going to say to the audience that if you want to ask questions in the chat, you can, and I will keep half an eye on that as well, because I'm sure that it would be useful for you to direct the questions with more laser focus on what you want to hear. Otherwise, I will keep going. So that must have been incredibly rewarding, commissioning a book from the start, you know, and I would imagine that book in particular has a sort of really intriguing mix of elements. Sophie Cunningham already has a name. She hasn't published a novel for a long time. And so there's a sort of responsibility there. And also, is this the first book that you've commissioned and seen through? Yes. Okay. Yes. So what's that like as a process?
Yeah, look, mildly terrifying. Well, hugely terrifying and very exciting. So it was incredible to have Sophie trust me with that book. As you mentioned, it was, you know, sort of around 16 years in the writing, her first fiction book since Bird. And she'd written, you know, non-fiction in between, and been, you know, very prolific in other areas, but had been working on this project for 16 years. So it was a huge feeling of responsibility for this, an important moment in her career. And I think even though that seems maybe a little heightened, it's always a really important moment in someone's career, even if it's their debut. It's hugely important to them, and the years that go into writing a manuscript and working on a manuscript is, you know, kind of very the publishing process then feels quite small compared to, you know, 16 years to write the book, and maybe it took us 2 years to get the book, Sophie's book, out into the public. So I think remembering that is going to be key. I'm obviously at the start of my commissioning career, so I want to try and keep a focus on that as I go forward, so that every time it feels as important. And working with someone like Sophie, I think as experienced as she is, and how many books she's put out, and she's been a publisher at Allen and Unwin, and she was the editor at Meanjin, and in many ways, you know, that relationship was formative back to me and beneficial back to me from Sophie's experience, and her trust in me just really gave me an absolute fire in the belly to make sure we did everything we could to make her book a success.
I'm imagining that it was a bit nerve-wracking having Sophie as a former publisher, and
no, she's actually I think in lots of ways it made her very understanding, right, because she knew the process so intimately that she knew the reasoning behind things, and she was very very open to my ideas, which is, you know, really a special privilege, I think.
That's great. So what are the qualities of a productive working relationship between a writer and an editor? What do you think are the things that really make it go well?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think every relationship works differently based on the personalities of the author, but the most productive relationships I think I have are when the work is the center and the focus. So not so much a and everybody has ego, and that's totally fine. But this idea that you're serving the work, you're serving the manuscript, everybody's working towards the same goal, even if you might have really different approaches or different ideas. There's a deep conversation around what will make this book the best version of itself. I don't think there's many editors that work in a real, well, there might be, but that idea of being really intrusive and saying this is the way it should be and rewrite this way. And I don't tend to work that way, because as we were discussing before we sort of jumped on, Belinda, like, I'm not a writer, I'm an editor. I enjoy the craft of editing. I enjoy the shaping of things, but at the end of the day, the voice is the author's. And but if they're willing to hear your feedback and really engage with it, like, it becomes a very satisfying relationship, because it's kind of momentum and you're excited and you're talking about, like, even, I don't know, dinkuses, which is the little thing, that the image that you put between the text breaks, or the use of certain punctuation or language, or what people are trying to achieve. And those relationships where that work is the be all and end all, I think work the best for me. But it's quite it's quite a personal relationship too, which I think isn't, it's not that it was surprising to me, but I don't know that I'd ever thought it through in terms of how emotional and how intertwined you kind of become with your authors and their lives. And I'm working with a woman whose book is coming out in February, Sita Walker. It's her debut memoir. And she said, we have to, you've read my memoir 3 times now. Like, I need to know everything about you. Like, you have to sit down, tell me your siblings, tell me, like, oh, because, it had felt very one way. I'm working with her memoir. And I was like, oh, I have to write down all the bullet points of my life for you so you can, so it feels like a conversation.
Reciprocate.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say, when you were talking before about the way that the editing process is a small part, time-wise, of what's gone into a manuscript. From the point of view of the author, well, speaking for myself anyway, the relief when you start working with an editor, you've been working all this time on your own, and somebody is, as you say, engaged with the work and enters the world of the work, and you don't feel alone anymore. It's fantastic. It's just somebody meets you in the work and helps you to turn it into a book. It's a terrific, it's utterly nerve-wracking, because you've come to the point where you really don't want to stuff it up, and where the decisions are really kind of, they're big decisions sometimes, even when they just look like a small thing. But that working with a serious editor who is working on it and really appreciates the work and wants it to be its best version is so good. It's one of the best bits of writing, I think. It's like, oh my God, it's going to work. It's going to be okay. Okay, all right. What else did I want to know? So maybe I'm going to ask some questions on behalf of the students until they overcome their shyness. What advice would you give writers about finding their way into publication?
Yeah, interesting. So if the goal is to, I'll just speak from my experience, if the goal is book publication, if that's what success kind of means to you, or the form that you're interested in, there's a few ways to get noticed, I suppose, depending on what areas you're writing in. I think if you're looking at literary fiction or those sorts of areas, being published in lit mags like Kill Your Darlings or Going Down Swinging. That's a good way to get your writing recognised or get yourself on the radar of people who are looking for work, or have something in your bio that when you submit helps set your work apart. I think same for nonfiction as well. There's lots of great places to write shorter form things. So Meanjin, Sydney Review of Books, Liminal, those sorts of, and as well, like the university anthologies can be great just as practice, just to kind of hone your craft. There are a few pathways in terms of manuscript prizes and things, which I'm sure everyone's heard about. So kind of the Banjo Prize, I think is Penguin's. Ultimo's partnered with Westwards at the moment to, we've just announced the winner of that for a writer of manuscript from Western Sydney. The Richell Prize. There's those sorts of things that even if you don't win, if you end up on a shortlist, can be really helpful in terms of getting your work and your name in front of agents or publishers. And I think that's sometimes the thing that helps you stand out. We have a submission portal at Ultimo, and I think lots of publishers also have unsolicited ways of getting your manuscript through. They can be tricky in terms of getting seen, and if that's the pathway that you think would be helpful, I would suggest just really honing your synopsis, the start of your manuscript, and just the understanding of who you think the audience is. If you have a look at the submissions portal on Ultimo, we ask really specific questions that I think would be good to think about, even if you don't submit to Ultimo, about who do you think your reader is, where, what kind of books do you envision that this book sits alongside, that kind of understanding of where your work fits in the ecosystem of publishing. You don't need to know all of it, because the whole point of getting a publisher is that they're supposed to help you navigate that and help you position your book and your work. But having your own understanding of what you're trying to do, I think, is really clarifying for what you're writing and for you.
That's so helpful. So I would certainly direct our students to your website to have a look at those questions. Just before we're starting to get some questions in the chat, which is great. Just before I move to those, something you said sort of fueled another question in my mind about marketing. The understanding generally seems to be these days that authors are more responsible than they used to be for marketing their own work. So when you talk about, I mean, that's, maybe that's not true, but that seems to be the perception. So when you talk about understanding who you're writing for, I guess if this is the case, then it's doubly important. Do you think that's true, that authors do need to be quite proactive about finding an audience for their work?
That's interesting. I think there definitely was the idea that if you had a social profile, that there was a better chance of selling your book. But I don't think it's actually played out in any real meaningful way. And I think we're moving a little bit further away from that idea that, I don't know, if you love Twitter and you've got 10K followers, that's great. Like, that's not going to be a bad thing. But if you hate Twitter and it's like pulling teeth and it's taking time away from doing what you want to do, there's no point struggling through it, if just because you think that it might help some publisher, I don't know, tick a box, but it probably wouldn't necessarily turn into book sales. There are a few places that I think is important. I think if you're writing commercial fiction, romance, crime, they've got really active associations or groups, which I think could great to get involved with, even if you just want to get to know the other people who are writing crime. Those places, I think, seem to, if not translate to sales, at least help people feel like a sense of camaraderie and get to know their cohort. And then when they publish a book, their cohort is really supportive. So you'll see that with a lot of commercial fiction writers or crime writers, that they all big up each other, and that helps promote the book. But I don't think that you need to, I don't think you should get on social media and suffer if it doesn't bring you joy, because I don't know that it would make that much difference.
I will take that advice to heart very happily. I have a question from Vanessa Berry, which follows on beautifully from what you just said. Planned it, the pair of you. Vanessa says she's so excited to read Sophie's book, as am I. Congratulations, Bridget. So Vanessa is interested to hear about how publishers are part of and work with literary communities.
I think it varies from publisher to publisher. I think you can sort of see that, you can sort of see the focus of different publishers in what they do and how they interact. So I think, you know, Vanessa, you're with Giramondo, they're obviously very invested in the community that they are in, and they support writers at various stages. They've got close ties to Sydney Review of Books, where there's, you know, authors being built up, and there's kind of like almost a community outreach that they do, which is really mentorship and potentially part of them being tied to the university as well. They have this kind of ability to nurture. Ultimo is trying to do that through a few different ways, where the Ultimo Prize and some anthologies that we're doing, we're trying to work out the best way to get emerging writers published in print and help give them an idea of what that feels like. And partnering with people like Westwords as well, instead of trying to, I guess, start from scratch, trying to engage with people who already know their communities and help them get pathways into publishing that way. I think maybe the multinationals are more think of community as readers rather than the writers. They have their manuscript development prizes, and sometimes there's mentorship as part of that, and they've been good, but I think they're really reader focused or market focused, or I don't know that they think of themselves necessarily as their role being to nurture new talent. I think it's potentially focused more at the end of the process rather than the start and bringing those people up. And hi, Vanessa.
Okay, so I have two questions from one of our students, Joey McPhail. Have you considered shifting to something like freelance editing to fully immerse in the shaping process without the other parts of editing in a publishing house, project management, etc.? Okay, that's the first question.
So I did freelance pretty much exclusively for a few years before I went in-house. There are a few things, there's some pluses and minuses to it. I think you're right in terms of engaging with the work is really great. What you don't get to do is talk to the author about it. So I found that kind of happened in a vacuum, and you are getting a copy edit brief and you are doing the work, and then you send it back and someone says, that's great, thanks. And your invoice gets paid, but you never really know what happens beyond that. So I found that a bit unsatisfying, but then lots of people think that, like, love that part of it. The admin killed me, like the admin and the hustle I found quite hard. So there's lots of really boring things like paying your own super and working out how to pay tax for the work. And then sometimes having heaps of work and feeling like you can't get it done. And then sometimes having no work, like there'd be periods around Christmas, I think, that would be really, really quiet. I don't think that happens as much anymore. And I think that things are happening quite a bit more consistently. And I also think that really good freelancers are harder to come by these days for whatever reason. So if you love it and you're good at it, there's lots of opportunities, I think, at the moment to do it and make a living for yourself. Whereas I didn't feel that. Also, maybe I was just bad at it and I wasn't a good freelancer. So that's also a huge possibility, because no one ever gives you feedback either as a freelancer. You have to gauge your work by the fact that they continue to book you. So I haven't considered going back now. And the other thing with in-house for me in this job at Ultimo is I like the other things. I like problem solving, and I like, but for me, the biggest thing was just I like talking to the authors directly. I like having that access. I want to go back and forth multiple times. I don't want to just work on the thing and then hand it over. But that's just a personality thing, not no one is better than the other, I don't think.
Yeah, I've sometimes thought that freelance works better at some life stages than others as well. Like, I've been a freelancer. I would find it more nerve-wracking now. I didn't used to worry about it so much, but I would probably find it a bit, I don't know, I've become a nervous Nelly in my old age.
Actually, I should probably say as well that for full disclosure, I was also doing corporate freelancing. So in terms of what I was earning on just, good literary, that, had to be offset by, writing about bridges and trains, and which I also enjoyed, but there was a balance of kind of corporate and creative freelancing.
Yeah, that's useful information, I think. And I would say often the way that people mix things to make it work. Okay, and so Joey's second question is, are there ways for maybe someone without a lot of experience in the world, in brackets, maybe a master's of creative writing, to get into the editing field, like working for a freelance editing agency or something similar, or is the best bet through a publisher or something else entirely?
I suppose it depends what you like about what. So for editing, I don't know of any freelance agencies, so it does have to be a little bit self-directed. Oh, I suppose Reedsy, I haven't kind of used that before. So for experience there, I think if you've got the opportunity to do anything at uni, like work with the anthologies, or if there's any practical experience you can get in that sense, that's really helpful. Proofreading is usually the first opportunity that a publisher will give you to freelance. Like, they often won't let you copy edit straight away, because if it doesn't work out, the time to redo it is too much. It makes the schedules all go out of whack. But often you can try someone on a proofread and do the proofread yourself, and then that can be a good way in. I got my freelance opportunities by working at KYD, and some of the authors that I worked with really liked working with me and asked me to do other jobs for them, whether that was fact-checking their book when it came out, or doing some additional proofreading. So if you can build relationships with authors. And then I met publishers through working at the Emerging Writers Festival, and just, I think, having met them in a capacity where you've just watched a panel, or you're on a panel for something like National Young Writers Festival, you could be on the panel, you don't even have to be in the audience. Them knowing your name and then you emailing and saying, oh, we met and here's my CV and I'd be interested in proofreading, helps just get your foot in the door freelance wise. And then I forgot the second part of the question. What was the second part?
Well, I think that already was the second part of the
great.
question. Yeah, I think that covers it. Okay, so Jemima asks a question about whether you think there's a risk of the hierarchy or process of a small publishing house becoming more cemented over time. So I guess Jemima's alluding to the fact that maybe you're in a golden era right now. What happens
yes.
as you grow up?
Quite possible. It's something we were just talking about a couple of weeks ago, actually, because we were doing sort of a stop and recalibrate after 2 years, and just that idea that by accident are we going to just replicate all the things we didn't like about working in big publishing, because all of a sudden you're adding in this extra meeting and you're doing this, and that risk that you might actually just fall back on hierarchies, or that the hierarchy might be, okay, well, we're the 4 people from the start and you're the 4 people that came in later, so we're the bosses and you're the not bosses or whatever. I think for Ultimo, why I'm not worried about it is that we're all just really invested in the conversation and the ideas. Like we're just really nerds for publishing and books. Like it's not, there isn't an ego there that feels personal. Like maybe there's a bit of an Ultimo ego, like we want to do good stuff and we want to feel good as a group. And there's definitely like ambition for our books and our authors. But everyone just is working towards that same goal. And over time, our goal is never to get so big that we can't still be bespoke. So we don't want to get to the size where we're doing 120 books a year. We don't have ambitions to get to a multinational size or to a big publisher size. We want to get to the right size for what we want to do, which is focus in on every title that comes out each month. And I just don't think you can do that with, 8 titles and, hundreds and hundreds of staff, or, like I'll take more staff, that would be great. But I don't think it will cement any bad habits, because I don't think we'll get big enough that we ever can't check each other, hopefully.
Great, that was a good question and a very interesting answer, thank you. So Rosalind asks, would you recommend a Masters of Publishing for people wanting to get into the industry, or are there other pathways? What sort of jobs would help you get into the industry if you're struggling to find one that's related to books, like sales or customer service?
I think the Masters is interesting. I think it's a good chance to work out what you want to do. I think there's a bit of a move away from it being necessary to actually get an in-house job. I think it's more if you're excited by it and it helps you formulate your ideas and plans about what you want to do. But definitely in recruitment, we're trying to move away from that idea that you have to have all these kind of additional educational things in order to do what you can do in your house. In terms of jobs, obviously I say bookstores is really good. Any of the festival experience I think is good as well, just to get a sense of the ecosystem of publishing and all the other things that go around it. Writers' centres, any of those kind of arts orgs can be really good to help you get a foot in. Like I was comms at Writers Victoria, so you're working with lots of writers, your publishers are coming to your events, you're just kind of embedding yourself so that it just demystifies the whole process for you. And I can't really overestimate how highly regarded book selling is by publishers. Like I didn't realize when I was working in bookstores that it would actually impress people. I thought I was just working in a bookshop, but it's really when you're in publishing seen as like the most important end place of the publishing industry. Like it's not even considered separate, it's considered the same, and we all know the booksellers' names, and if you can get that, that's great. The other thing I would say is if you're looking to get into entry-level publishing is to not get stuck on editorial. It's the hardest, I think, to get into. And there are a few things that I think if you sit and work out what you like, might work just as well, because what I really liked was reading, and I didn't know there was a job called product, which is essentially kind of curating international lists for Australian publishers. So you do a lot of reading, you do a lot of like reader engagement, you kind of curate a mini list of international titles. And I think lots of the time they have trouble filling those roles because people don't understand what product is. I certainly didn't understand what product was. If you're interested in getting into commissioning long term, again, sales can be a really good way to get into that. And people often don't think of sales when they're thinking about wanting to work with books. But again, you get to read a lot, you get to meet people, you meet all the booksellers. It kind of sets you up to be able to do lots of other things. Yeah.
Yeah, the sales and book selling jobs really give you useful knowledge. I think that that a lot of editors bypass, but if you have that knowledge as well, is gold. Okay, another question from Claire. Hello, Claire. So as a small publisher, is there a need to balance a catalogue with more sellable material versus work you'd love to see out there? For example, to almost fund the little works that may not have huge sales.
Yeah, that's kind of the old publishing motto, isn't it? That you publish 12 books and one might work, and hopefully that pays for the other 11. We definitely have commercial responsibilities at Ultimo, that there's no doubt. It's not a not-for-profit. We have responsibilities to try and make books work and not lose money. There is oh, now I've lost my train of thought. Oh yes, so another sort of part of the reason why Ultimo was set up is that there's almost this gap in the market where a lot of multinationals might not look at a project if they think that it won't sell more than 10,000 copies. But if you've had any look at any books in Australian publishing or any of the BookScan lists or anything, you'll see that there's not many that kind of get there easily. So Ultimo is trying to look at those mid, I don't like the term mid-list because it kind of feels like it's got a judgment attached to it, but that kind of middle range where books might sell 5,000 copies or 6 or 7 or 8, which might not get a go somewhere else, but you can make that commercially viable if you do it in the right way. But you do still want some unicorns, we call them, or something that you might buy small that just runs away, or something unusual that just connects with a niche audience in a way that means that you bought it with the expectation of selling 3,000 copies, but it's going to sell 30, and that's every publisher's dream. We're constantly chasing it. I don't think it matters if you're indie or multinational. We all want that runaway success.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to remind the audience that we're coming up to the top of the hour if they do want to ask anything else while I plunge on. Maybe I'll ask you about Love and Virtue after that. Yeah. So that seems, I don't know if this is right, but from the outside, it seems like the answer to the question, oh, what does Ultimo do, is Love and Virtue. Is this book that has a kind of topical interest. It kind of captures a moment, perhaps. And also, I don't know if this is how you think of yourselves, but from the outside, I'm sort of seeing a kind of blurring of the distinction between literary and commercial, something that kind of appeals to both sides. I mean, was that a surprise, that book? Did you know that it was going to be huge? And
both yes and no. So I think that book was very highly sought after, not just from Ultimo, but I think everyone saw Diana's talent. It was really obvious from the manuscript that she sent through that this was an incredibly talented author doing something interesting, who had the potential to have a very long career. So we weren't the only ones who identified her talent. So I won't, it's kind of obvious to everyone once you read her work. But then we launched the book. It was, our first year was almost entirely in lockdown. We were sending out advanced reading copies of all of our books, but especially, Love and Virtue, knowing how good it was, knowing that it was, it had the potential to really be something. And everyone was honestly just too sad to read it. Like, booksellers were exhausted. They didn't, we were this new company saying, you've got to pay attention to this. Like, this is the best. You're going to love it. And they were like, oh, like I'm tired and I haven't read the 3 other, it was the same year that it was Christos Tsiolkas, Michelle de Kretser, like all these books they knew they had to read in order because they were done deals. So, and then it came out and we were like 1 month out of lockdown, and it felt, and then we had the supply chain issues. So even when people started wanting to read it, it's like, well, you got to get the book to the bookstore. So it really did feel like touch and go in terms of what could happen. But we just couldn't believe that a book that good wouldn't succeed. Like we had, and we really did push, and Diana worked really hard. And at one point, when there were stock issues, where we were driving the book around to bookstores because that was the only way they were going to get there, because all the couriers were, messed up. So it was terrifying and exhilarating, but it was just too good a book to do anything but every single thing possible. And I guess in that way, it's kind of Ultimo, because we're small enough that every book can kind of be treated like that. Whereas if we had 7 books that month that all needed to have that really focused attention, you couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's inspiring and wonderful. I'm glad it worked out well.
I know.
That's great. I might just ask you as my last question, what are you reading? What do you like reading for pleasure?
Oh, interesting. Classic publishing worker. I really struggle to read, so I'm audio booking at the moment as a way to get me through, and I am on a massive Gothic junket at the moment. I just reread Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, and now I'm on to My Cousin Rachel. I'm really interested in this idea of maybe trying to do more modern Gothic Australian fiction. I think there could be something really interesting in that. So as part of my fact-finding mission, I'm going back and immersing myself in all of Daphne du Maurier's twisted relationships and thoroughly enjoying it.
Yeah, what's not to enjoy? Daphne du Maurier, so good. That was just so useful, wonderful and generous, Bridget. I think you've given us all a lot of food for thought, and really, I love a conversation with a publisher that is so upbeat and positive.
Do you like my job? It's very fun. It is. It's a really good job to have. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it looks like Ultimo is doing really exciting things too. It's really wonderful to see. So thank you so much. I hope we see you again soon.
Anytime.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Bridget. The thank yous are coming through.
Oh, yes. I'll just read all the thank yous so that I get my ego boost. Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you. Perfect.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. To our students, have a good mid-semester break. Take some time for yourself, read some books or do some audio. All right. See ya. Bye, Bridget. See you soon.